But me, you're me, Louie T. Welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive series, The Reign of Terror, chronicling the 23 years of pure hell that previous Washington Redskins football team and Commanders owner Daniel Snyder put us through as a collective fan base. So today we're starting the series off with chapter 1. We're going to party like it's 1999. Daniel Snyder's first year here in Washington, in the nation's capital, as the owner of the Washington then Redskins. And we didn't know what we didn't know in those days. We didn't know that we were going to embark upon a period where we were among the worst franchises, not just in football, but in the entire sporting arena. We didn't know that we wouldn't win another Super Bowl, wouldn't even come close, wouldn't even see another NFC championship. We didn't know we were embarking upon that journey that we were about to go on at the time in 1999. We were just 7 or 8 years removed from our last championship, and we thought, hey, couple of moves here or there, you find a quarterback, get the right coach, and boom, we'll be back where we were with Joe Gibbs and the glory years. It's funny when you look at 99, Snyder's first year. He really didn't have a chance. He got control of this team right as the season was about to start, and there were things that he wanted to do. Like, he wanted to get rid of Brad Johnson. He just got here a smidge too late to be able to get all of the things done that he wanted to do. And so, honestly, 99, which ultimately ended up being his most successful season as owner from a wins-loss perspective, he really didn't have a chance to mess it up. He tried, but he couldn't. So 99 was an extremely fun year for me as a fan. And it's funny when you look at 1999. Norv Turner should have been fired already. If we were living in present day and Norv Turner had done what he had done the previous 5 years as the head coach of this organization, he would have been fired already. You think about it. Norv Turner's first year is 1994. They had just fired Richie Pettibone in 93, after I think he went 4-12. They hire Norv Turner, and he promptly goes 3-13, right, the next year. They draft Heath Shuler. That's an epic fail. Just off the strength of that, GM, head coach, all of that probably should have been fired. Heath Shuler was an absolute bust and one of the biggest in NFL history at that time. With that said, he goes 3-13 his first year. The next year, I think he's like 5-11, 6-10. I think he was more 6-10. The year after that, in 1996, they start the season off 7-1. Okay? And we're thinking, here we go, back to the glory years. And then they finish up the season losers of 6 of their final 8. They finish the season at 9-7. They miss the playoffs. That would have been the year, if we live in present day, that's the year he gets fired. He doesn't make it after that year. You don't get to start the season 7-1 and finish, losing 6 out of your final 8 and keep your job. Not after 3-13 and 6-10 or 5-11. But somehow, and it was a different day and age, he kept his job. And I think a huge part of that was because of ownership. Jack Kent Cooke and his estate and Washington kind of being in flux. It's sort of the same thing we're going through now with Ron Rivera, right? Like, had this whole ownership change situation had not been going on, Ron might have been fired already. He hasn't really done anything. And maybe his saving grace right now is the division win in his first year at 7-9, but he hasn't really done anything to warrant him keeping his job to this point, if we're being honest with one another. He hasn't done anything other than be mediocre, which he carried on tradition from Jay Gruden, right? We've been a mediocre franchise pretty much since the last time we made the playoffs, or the last time we made the playoffs with a winning record, which was back in 2015. We've been a mediocre franchise ever since. 8-7-1, 7-10, 7-9. Name it, we've done it. 8-8-1. Any way you can spell mediocre, we've pretty much done it, right? So you fast forward to 99, and Norv Turner's maybe figuring some shit out. You're not quite sure, 96 you finish up at 9-7 as I mentioned. Then 97 is the Gus Frerotte year with the tie, the helmet into the wall, and all of that nonsense. You barely missed the playoffs that year. I think we were 8-7-1 that year, and so it looked like a mess. It looked like Norv wasn't the right guy for the job. We're just kind of spinning our wheels in place, and then 99 hits, and you get new ownership, and this was a season that was an unexpected and pleasant surprise, honestly speaking, because we didn't know what ownership was going to do. We had no idea what kind of a tyrant Daniel Snyder was going to turn out to be. So we're excited about that. Finally getting, an ownership group in here. And Brad Johnson explodes in 99. Albert Connell and Michael Westbrook explode. Stephen Davis explodes. The offense as a whole explodes. This is a really quality defense. We draft one of the greatest corners in NFL history in Champ Bailey that year. He explodes in his rookie season. It just was this perfect storm. It was this collection of different things that needed to go right, that did go right that season. Larry Centers came over and was fantastic for us. And there were 3 games in particular that stood out in 99. It's one of my favorite seasons. So you bear with me as I get excited from time to time as I'm talking about this particular year. So 99 starts out with one of the most dramatic games of the season, really, that year. But as a Washington fan, it's excruciating playing this game back in my mind because I remember it like it was yesterday. It's the week 1 game against Dallas. We blow a 35-14 lead, lose the game in overtime, 41-35 to the Cowboys. This game is so crazy because I thought Dallas was going to kick our ass. Honestly, the game starts, Dallas scores touchdowns like immediately, boom, boom, and it's 14-3. And it looks like we're going to get our asses handed to us. And what people forget in that game is that we turned it over twice inside the red zone, twice inside the 10-yard line in that game. Stephen Davis had a fumble as he was going in for a touchdown inside the 5 that Dallas recovered. Might have been inside the 10. And then Brad Johnson had a stupid fumble on a sack where I don't even know how he lost the ball. And so we got no points out of that. This game should have never ended the way that it did. But that's nor here nor there. We're down 14-3. And then we rattle off 32 unanswered points. It was so much fun watching that game unfold the way that it did. Big play after big play. Stephen Davis was outstanding. Albert Connell had a couple of big grabs for some touchdowns. And here we are, dominating the Cowboys. It's still hard for me to fathom in my mind how we managed to blow this game because you're essentially up 3 touchdowns with about 13 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. You're up 2 touchdowns with 6 minutes to go in the ball game. 2 touchdowns. And we managed to blow the lead. And you know what's even crazy is the Cowboys had the football with a chance to beat us. How did they get 3 possessions? I still can't wrap my brain around that. How they got 3 possessions that quickly, tied the game, and had a chance to beat us, and Aikman throws a pick. It's a great defensive play, and he ends up getting picked off, and that's what preserved overtime for us. The Cowboys win the toss for overtime, and remember, these were different overtime rules. So this was sudden death. First score wins. Doesn't matter, field goal, touchdown, it's over. They win the toss. The very first play, I'll never forget this play. It's etched in my memory bank. I'm watching the game with my dad because he thought the game was over when they were down 35-14. I thought the game was over when we were down 14-3. Okay, so we both thought the game was over. The other team was going to win, and I really thought we had won when we were up 35-14. And then they come all the way back, and Troy Aikman goes play action fake on the very first play of overtime, and Rocket Ismail is every bit of 7 yards behind the defense. I don't know what the hell they were looking at, what they were expecting, but they weren't expecting that, clearly. And he literally walks into the end zone, and they win the game 41-35. It was one of the last times I cried watching a game, and it was also one of the last times that I felt like I wanted to vomit. I've had times where I'm like, man, that's excruciating. That's excruciatingly painful. But literally, I felt ill, like I wanted to vomit watching that. But, you know, I think it was games like that that built up a callus with this team. They ended up having this harder exterior shell and were able to be, I think, a more hungry, a much more mentally tough team after that. And we had some beatdowns in that season where we just destroyed teams. I remember the Chicago game was an epic beatdown. We went, I think the next week after that Dallas loss, we go to the Giants. And, you know, the Meadowlands was a house of horrors for us. I think we put up a 50 spot on them that next week. A 50 burger. That's when I knew this offense was legit. Like, oh, my God. We just went to New York, and we put up those kind of numbers. I think Stephen Davis had 3 rushing touchdowns in that game. It was crazy. So that was the first game that I truly vividly remember from that regular season. The second game, I think it was right before our bye week, if I'm not mistaken. The Carolina Panthers came to town, and I'll never forget this game. And I learned a valuable lesson from this game. So I think we're 3-1 going into this game, or we're 4-1. We're one of the two. And we have a bye the next week. So we might have been 2-1, and that game made us 3-1 heading into the bye. I think we had an early bye that season, I think. Anyway. Tim Batuka, this is the running back. He played at Michigan. He was drafted by the Carolina Panthers. Tim Batuka goes apeshit on us in the first quarter. I'll never forget this. He had a run of like 60, like one of 40, and then he had a short one, like 3 or 4 yard touchdown run. Like, it was crazy. He had 3 touchdown runs in the first quarter. Man had 5 carries for like 130 yards rushing. 5 carries for like, he was averaging like 50 a pop. That's what it felt like. I might be over exaggerating, okay? But he was like averaging like, it felt like 50 a pop. Obviously, it was more like 30, right? But who's keeping count? I was. It was ridiculous. So we're down 21-0. And I wanted to stop watching the game. I was ready to check out. You know, I'm a young kid. I don't have time for this shit. I can go outside and play. And my dad's like, no, you're going to watch this game. Like, when you guys are destroying a team like this, do you get up and turn the game off? No, you sit there and you enjoy yourself. While you're getting your ass kicked, you're going to sit here and you're going to watch it and you're going to take it. So I'm sitting here thinking this is going to be a long day. It's the first quarter and we're down 21-0. And the Panthers stink, by the way. They're not a good team right now. And Tim Batuka is just doing us. And then slowly but surely, we chip away and we chip away. And then next thing you know, you look up. Oh, shit, we're right back in this game. And I'm like, and my dad looks at him and he says, see? And you were ready to turn the game off. You didn't want to watch it anymore. So we end up taking the lead. And the Panthers come right back. They take the lead late. They go for 2. They don't get it. They're up 36-35. And I'll never forget, we moved the ball down the field, and I didn't trust Brett Conway at the time. You know, I wasn't the biggest Brett Conway fan. He was our place kicker at the time. And I wasn't sure what the hell we were going to get here. Was he going to make this kick? Was he going to miss the kick? Sure enough, he made it. We won an epic thriller, 38-36. And I just remember jumping up and down, and I remember my dad giving me a tongue lashing because I didn't want to watch that entire game. And it taught me, no matter what, win, lose, ass whooping, getting your ass kicked, whatever the case, stick around for the finish of the game. Stick all the way through. And that's why I'm always the constant optimist when it comes to, can we come back? And I'm thinking of all these crazy different types of ways that we may or may not be able to come back in a game. It's because of that game right there where we somehow came back down 21. That kind of planted the seed for that Tampa Bay 24 to nothing comeback victory years later, many years later in 20, what was that, 15? Games like that set the foundation for that for me as a fan, right? I'm not going to give up on the team. So that was a big win. And you just go through that entire season, the ups, the downs, and you could see the makings of a really good team. One thing was for sure that this was a really good offense. Not good, great offense that year. We were one of the best in the NFL that year offensively. Stephen Davis at the time set a franchise record with over 1,405 yards rushing. Albert Connell and Michael Westbrook were teammates that went over 1,000 yards in the same season. Solid contribution from Steven Alexander as a tight end. I remember him being a guy that we had drafted maybe a year or two prior, relatively early, second, third round, something like that. And he was solid that year. Larry Sanders, as I mentioned. Skip Hicks was a guy we spent a draft pick on out of UCLA maybe 2 or 3 years prior to that. He was starting to really contribute. Larry Sanders was huge, man. I loved Larry Sanders. And remember, the Arizona Cardinals were in our division in those days. So we saw Larry Sanders twice a year. He was a fantastic. At that time, he was a fullback. But really, Larry Sanders was a running back. But they used him as a fullback, and you couldn't guard Larry Sanders out of the backfield. Good luck. He was outstanding, and that was a hell of an acquisition for us that year. He was huge. And then, offensive line was really solid. You had John Jansen. We didn't have Chris Samuels yet. So I think we had, forget who was at tackle. Was it Andy Heck or somebody was at tackle? I know Trey Johnson was at guard. I loved Trey Johnson. And I think he made it to the Pro Bowl that year, as a matter of fact. He was huge, killed people in the run game. And then the defense was solid. It was not a great defense. I won't sit here and act as if it was a great defense because it wasn't. But it was solid. But, I think Dan Wilkerson was on that defense. He was great in 99. A lot of people kind of lump him in with Daniel Stubblefield. Dan Wilkerson was really good for us, especially those first 2 years that we got him. He was outstanding. People used to just lump him in with Daniel Stubblefield because he was such a disappointment. Big Daddy was playing some ball for us. He was outstanding in 99. You had Kennard Lang, N.D. Kalu. Let's see how many of these defenders I can name. N.D. Kalu. Marco Coleman was on that D-line as well. Linebackers, you had Derek Smith. I used to love him. You don't have too many, at that time at least, beast white middle linebackers. So you had Derek Smith. Sean Barber was one of our linebackers. Can't think of any more linebackers. I think one of them, Jones. I want to say one of them was Jones on that team, but I can't remember. Secondary was loaded. So you had Champ Bailey, obviously. You still had Darrell Green. You had Sam Shade. I really liked Sam Shade in those days. You had Stevens, who was a white safety. My favorite white safety at the time. I liked him a lot. Probably more than most. And it was a really solid secondary. Darryl Pounds. It was a solid secondary. It wasn't great by any stretch of the imagination, but you could win a lot of football games with that secondary. And they took the football away. Champ Bailey had 5 interceptions in rookie season. We knew right out of the gate, we just hit a home run. And, 99 was, it felt like the beginning of something that could be a nice little run here in Washington. Clearly, Daniel Snyder had other plans, which we'll get to as we go through this series. But anyway, you fast track through the season. And my third and final game of that regular season that stood out was the game we clinched the division in. It was week 16. We're on the road on Sunday Night Football. I'll never forget this. I begged my parents to let me stay up and watch this game because it was a Sunday night game. and we had a chance to clinch the division. All we had to do was beat the 49ers, and it would render Week 17's game meaningless. And so we go over there, and that 49ers team, that's still Jerry Rice, it's Terrell Owens, it's Jeff Garcia, it's Garrison Hurst. It's a good football team over there. And here we are, locked in a tie with them. And I remember the 49ers had a chance to beat us at the end of regulation. And they had a young Fred Jackson on their team who ended up really exploding in the league in Buffalo. But they had a young Fred Jackson, and late in the game, they gave him a carry, and he fumbled. And they were already in field goal range. Now, were they going to make it? I don't know. But they were already in field goal range. And he fumbles the ball, we recover, and that gets us to overtime. We get to overtime, and it turned into like the running back show. Literally, Skip Hicks was in because Stephen Davis had turned his ankle. And we dumped it off to Skip Hicks twice out of the backfield. I remember this like it was yesterday because Skip wasn't really a dude that we threw it to a lot. It was Larry Sanders who was getting a bulk of the catches out of the backfield, and when it wasn't him, it was Brian Mitchell. So Skip Hicks is in for Stephen Davis, and he catches one in the flats, makes a guy miss, gets up the field. We're at midfield. They throw it to him again, and he gets another like 8-9 yard gain. And then the 49ers got tired of us driving it down the field because remember, we're still in that day where it's literally sudden death. So first score beats you, a field goal beats you. So they send an all-out blitz on Brad Johnson. And I remember Brad Johnson just dropping back, jumping in the air, and just lofting it to Larry Sanders in the flats. And I remember, plain as day, I remember the announcer on Sunday Night Football. I want to say it was Paul McGuire. Says, oh my God, they're going to win the game. And I'm thinking like, because, you can't, it's a tight shot. You can't see what's in front of him. He catches the ball and he turns up the field. There's not a 49er in sight. And then I hear Paul McGuire say, oh my God, they're going to win the game. And he jumps down the sideline. They're in the 49er within 7 yards of him. A guy comes late, but he's already pretty much in the end zone. And we win the game. And I remember begging my parents to let me stay up and watch overtime. And we won on the very first possession of overtime. And there was this euphoric celebration. And we're going to the playoffs. We're hosting a playoff game. This is going to be great. We haven't been to the playoffs since 1992, right? The last time Joe Gibbs was here as our head coach. So this is a pretty big effing deal, right? So we win the next week in a meaningless Week 17 game. We go in as a 10-6 division winner. We get Detroit at home. And the significance of this game was the last time we won the Super Bowl, we hosted the Detroit Lions. That was in the NFC Championship game, obviously, but still. We hosted the Lions, and the Lions had beaten us earlier in the regular season. They beat us up pretty good, too. Right? I don't remember the score, but I remember it was a nice, thorough ass-kicking. So I wasn't sure what was going to happen in that game. But there was no Barry Sanders, thank God. He'd retired the year before. So there was no Barry Sanders. Gus Frerotte, our old buddy, was there in Detroit, however. And, man, we put an ass whooping on the Detroit Lions. We jumped those boys 14-0. And before you know it, it's 27-0 at halftime. And something stupid I remember, and I can laugh about it now. It wasn't funny then. They threw a Hail Mary right before halftime. They almost caught it. They caught it, almost scored, rather. And it reminded me of that New Orleans Saints game from a couple of years ago where they did throw the Hail Mary and they did catch it right before half. That shit wasn't funny, right? But it's just crazy how a game can turn on something crazy like that. We were killing them. It was 27-0. You hate to go into halftime with them having some momentum off of a Hail Mary. But luckily we stopped whoever caught it at the 2-yard line. I want to say it was Herman Moore, but I don't remember who caught it. I remember they had Jermaine Crowell, Herman Moore. I think Johnny Morton was on that team against on that Lions team. Anyway, coincidentally enough, they scored their first points in that game on a block kick. It should have been a touchdown. Steven Alexander, our tight end, dropped an easy touchdown that would have made it 34-0. And then so we had to kick a field goal and it gets blocked. They catch it, do the Lions, and return it for a touchdown. That was their first score. They scored another touchdown in garbage time, but we thoroughly dominated them 27-13. Okay. So you go to Tampa the next week, and this is the last time I cried over a football game. I thought we were going to the NFC Championship game. We were up 13-0 in that ball game. Brian Mitchell runs back a kickoff to start the second half. We're in the driver's seat. They can't really do much of anything against our defense. And, you know, it just felt like fluke plays, a couple of mishaps by us. Brad Johnson throws a wounded duck of an interception on the left sideline that kept Tampa Bay in the game. We had our chances. Then, you know, obviously the bad snap at the end of the game that didn't even give Brett Conway a chance, who was fully capable of drilling that field goal. It was a long one, but fully capable. I never gave him a chance. And so we lose 14-13. The Bucs go on to push the greatest show on turf to the limit, but ultimately lose. I felt like we could have matched wits with them offensively. Now, Stephen Davis's injury was pretty significant because he played in the playoff game against Detroit, but he re-aggravated the injury. So he was not really healthy. But I felt like we could do enough offensively. I wasn't sure if our defense could stop their offense enough, but I would have sure liked to have seen us try. I would have loved the opportunity. It was the last time I thought we had a legitimate shot to win the Super Bowl. Now, with that season, that 99 season, the first year of Daniel Snyder, you're thinking to yourself, all right, a couple of tweaks here, a couple of tweaks there, a strong draft. Right? Because that 99 draft, we traded our one pick to get all of these picks from the Saints. Like, they gave us their whole entire draft, essentially. And we had their first round of the next year. So you're thinking, hey, if you can knock it out of the park next year in 2000 in the draft, add a couple pieces here or there, who knows what we could do. Boy, was I wrong. Now, they knocked it out of the park. Chris Samuels and LeVar Arrington with those 2 first-round picks. And we'll get into that 2000 season on the next episode of the Reign of Terror. But what it could have been, and we'll get into that on the next episode, in the next chapter. But 99 left you wanting more. It left you with this optimism of, hey, and remember, keep in mind, we were not that far removed from winning a Super Bowl. So in our minds, we don't have the same track, you know, the same mindset that we have now where, oh my God, you can't even see a Super Bowl right now as a fan base. If you're a fan of this team, you can't even, that doesn't even seem real, us winning a Super Bowl. That doesn't even seem fathomable, okay? Because we haven't even been to the NFC Championship game in so long. We haven't even won a playoff game since '05. Let that resonate and sink in. Like, understand the ineptitude that we've faced as a fan base these last 2.5 decades. Plus, we were only 6 or 7 years removed from the last time we were a dominant franchise. So 99 felt like we're about to get back to that. And then the real terror began. And that's where we'll leave off here. And we'll pick up in chapter 2, 2000. So that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this limited series, The Reign of Terror. Hope you join me for the rest of this series. It's going to be a hell of a journey. We can't heal as a fan base until we acknowledge all of this past and put it behind us for good. That's what we're going to do. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.